looking forward to hearing from Carolyn. She always has so much wisdom to share. Hello,
Hi
Carolyn.
there.
Still
Hi.
there?
Okay, I've got a lot to squeeze in here. Why do you think we need John more than ever now?
Because we are dealing with a collective dark night, a dark night of our species, a global dark night even. And of course, personal dark nights where there's a lot of pressure on all of us. So we have to go to the edge and come up with language and images and hope that keeps us going. Like T.S. Eliot, I think I shared that line with T.S. Eliot, that it's either despair or the mystics. And I think there's a lot of despair floating around today. So let's spend some time with John Cross's mysticism, his poetry especially, and see how that can ignite the fire, that fire in us, and at the same time lead us to places of depth, this age of Aquarius, this age of water bearing, and this age of feminism, to bring the water back as
Right.
as an image. And this is a thread in him. The feminine is just a constant thread, and it begins with his relationship with his mother, no doubt. She was a very special person, I think.
Let me just run something by you and see what you think. I I do marvel that his poetry came out of such pain, and that he would go into poetic expression in the midst of such madness. But I think that the power in examining poetry, which I think for a lot of people today is not that popular a thing to do, but is that the capacity to think like a poet, that the whole power in poetry, and the reason that he chose a mystical language is that it defeats or transcends logic and reason. And it's a way, because I think whenever anybody is confronted with obstacles in life, difficulties, the first tool people go to within themselves is reason and logic.
Mm-hmm.
Is the capacity to say, why is this happening? I need a reason for this. I need some kind of, logical explanation. But in fact, as we come to learn in life, very few things, except your plumbing, has a logical explanation for why it fell apart. But that doesn't explain why it fell apart for you. There's always the mysterious part. But when it gets to the place where your mind cannot get the answers that it wants, and you sense that my capacity to get through this is dependent upon my mind getting the answer, that is where one senses, if someone says, well, what are you going through? They'll automatically say, it's like, and they'll go to the first stage, which is metaphor. It's like hell. It's like this. It's like that. I feel, that they'll use a metaphor because they've run out of a way to describe it. The ordinary language doesn't work. And I think that it makes me wonder that if in healing, if people were assigned to write poetry, to put what their experiences are, what they're going through in a poetic language, in a poetic expression, it would cause them to turn to vocabulary that doesn't fit in the rational mind, but in the poetic mind. And in the poetic, they would have to turn to the vocabulary of the soul, or holy language. They would have to find a very different form and way to phrase what they were going through. And in that, I think they'd be amazed at the strength in themselves that they find. Mm-hmm. What do you think?
Absolutely. That's just brilliantly put. And this is what, William James says, one of the signs of mysticism ineffability, an inability to talk about it. And that is true of the joy and the awe, as well as the suffering and the soul loss, you see. So, like you say, then you're wandering around, if you've been taught, as all of us have, to think only rationally and not in terms of metaphor, and really that's the soul language, as you say. And this is what I call artist meditation, you see, to journal, or to do poetry, or to dance, or to make music, or to put into clay your deepest experiences, of whether it's of suffering and loss, or whether it's of joy and wonder. So that is the language of the mystic, that and silence. And so it's really basic. And John is a perfect example of that. And he failed himself when it comes to the conceptual. Like I say, he stopped his commentary on the Dark Night after only 10 stanzas. He couldn't do it anymore.
Yeah, right.
It didn't fit.
He couldn't make, like Teresa of Avila, trying to put her mystical experiences into logic. And she said, look, my brain just can't go there. She said, my brain tried, but it can't. It just can't.
It's right.
But I do wonder, Matt, if I think the people think or associate, this is a wide swatch of a commentary, but my experience is that most people associate poetry with this incredible formal type of writing and formal art and etc. But really, I think that if you thought about the language of the soul, and I think about healing all the time, and how I think about what experiences we allow ourselves to have, and how maybe we parameter our experiences within the limitations of our vocabulary. That if in fact we decided I need to train myself to think like a poet, because my experiences in life are not imaginative enough. They're not enchanting enough. They are logical. I need them to squeeze into some kind of orderly, logical way that they kind of unwind in my life, when in fact the poetic part of my soul is more open to the spontaneous, the eruptive, the emotive, that which cannot be explained logically, the miraculous, the invisible. And I think that what mystics have in common is they become poets. They become poets because they have to get out of that logical controlling language that suffocates the boundaries and parameters of what we will allow ourselves to experience, because we think that we must be able to explain our experiences to others, that they must be logical. And if we can't do that, the little space between logic and mysticism is insanity. I must be hearing voices. I must be they don't realize that, yeah, you might begin to hear voices, because this is a crowded universe.
Yes, and again, hearing voices is part of creativity, isn't it?
Exactly. And that's why the paths, that's what I'm excited about in this class, is that there are paths to creativity and to positiveness and to what I would call the mystic hidden in each person's soul. That when they start thinking about that, or stretching themselves like that, or putting those words in their head, that what's a mystical way of looking at this situation? Well, if they would say, I have no idea, then I would say, well, then start with poetic language. Start with poetic language. Just make it up. Take a poem and steal some good words from a poem that are descriptive or poetic, things that you would never think of yourself as saying, and apply it to what you're going through, and see if you don't feel an immediate liftoff.
Yeah, I've done a practice frequently with amazing results. I called creating an I am poem. So I tell people with no preparation, I take out a paper and pencil and write a poem. Every sentence begins with the word I am, and don't edit it. Just let flow, whatever wants to come out. And it's amazing what comes out. I mean, the results have been stunning over the years when this happens. But so I just give this tiny instruction, a little bit of form. Just begin every sentence with I am and go from there. And it is so healing for people. And people have absolute breakthroughs. They have mystical experiences. It's so simple.
Absolutely.
It's so
Absolutely.
simple. And of course, another practice is to do some um, oh, the name's missing me now. The Japanese haiku.
Haiku.
You know, to have a haiku format and just roll with that. And it's an invitation to exactly what you're talking about. And this is, as you say, the language of the soul.
Yeah.
And but we're not instructed in our culture. Our educational system is so about the rational.
Right.
That our intuitive mind and intuitive language, like you say, is underdeveloped. And it's amazing that these great mystics like Francis of Assisi and Dante birthed the Italian language. Eckhart was very responsible for birthing the German language, because up until his day, it was just a bunch of dialects. He brought it together. And then Julia Norwich helped birth the English language, first woman to write a book in English. And of course, John the Cross's poetry is considered still to this day the finest Spanish poetry ever. So, I mean, he wasn't an amateur, but it's not that someone gave him a doctorate in Spanish language or something. He didn't get it from his conceptual brain. He got it from his experiences, his deep heart experiences, both of joy, as we'll see Thursday, but also, of course, of the suffering that we'll see next week with the Dark Night. So, yeah, it's born of experience, and that's why it's a language of spirituality, because that's what spirituality is about. Spirituality is about our experiences of the divine, not our concepts of the divine.
Right. And experiences
Experiences
are supposed to blow the doors off our soul, to open it. We're not supposed to just sit in that place and say, now, why did this happen? And I wonder what the logical reason for is. Have people not really gotten to the truth that there is nothing logical about life?
Exactly. Oh, Otto Rank says that. He says life is irrational, not
Totally.
rational. And that's what we miss. And he also says women are closer to the real meaning of life.
Absolutely.
Because they go ritual. Ritual is a language.
Yes,
too.
ritual.
An alternative language.
If people really understood this, do you know how much suffering would be alleviated? The internal anxiety and internal, I mean, listening, if someone were listening to us for the first time as outsiders, listening to the way we were speaking, we wouldn't make sense to them. We have to reel them in slowly. And it may take a conversation, a simple one, saying, well, just explain, like, give me an example, a metaphor for what you're feeling. And they wouldn't realize they were speaking poetry. And in that, they were beginning to describe something that their rational mind couldn't, because it was so limited.
And of course, music plays that role for a lot of people too.
Totally.
Music.
Totally.
It's an alternative language that gets more directly to the soul, as you say, to the heart, to the deep experience. And I'm so glad that you responded in this way. And I loved your opening line about such madness. A good summary of his. That's another parallel, though, between John and us, is that he was living in a time of madness, religious, political. It was all hanging out. So are we. I mean, look at the mad people in Congress, right? On the airwaves these days. So, we're living through it too, but he held his ground. He didn't wilt. He didn't run. He held his ground. And there's tremendous lessons in that for us, And as you say, he turned to poetry.
That's right. That was his way.
That's right. It was his salvation.
I think we've run out of time in this wonderful first session. It was a blast. I, I, even a few minutes with you is a treasure, I have to say.
Well,
Okay,
thank you. And
we'll
did
be
you?
back. I'm sorry.
I do want to ask, did you like the paintings at the end from El
Oh,
Greco?
I love that. I
Yeah,
had no idea that there was a painting of the monastery he was in Toledo.
I
That
didn't either. It's just something I learned, and it was just the last minute today. We copied those
I
paintings,
didn't
and I
know
had a
that.
book of his, El Greco's book. That someone
I
gave it to his
didn't
nephews.
know that.
But I felt John the Cross on those paintings, and my
Yes.
God, they were the exact age minus 1 year, and he must have known all the trauma and drama of John's
How
life.
famous was John by the time he died? How well known was he?
That's a good question. He was not that well known, and his poetry was not that well known. No, he was not a public figure really. Within his order, he got elected to things and he got kicked out and all the rest. But as an individual, of course, he was not impressive. He was under 5 feet tall. He had a hunchback because and from the beatings, that's why he died young. And
Mm.
Teresa of Avila loved him as a friend, but she never fell in love with him, whereas she fell in love with most men in her life, as you know. But
Mhm.
there was none of that there. She wasn't tempted. He was not an attractive, and also he was an introvert, and he wasn't a happy camper. He wasn't a joyful kind of saint at all. That's clear, and he wasn't outgoing to people. He was definitely an introvert. So.
It wasn't a
Um,
Francis.
He wasn't a Francis. No,
Yeah,
no,
yeah, yeah.
no.
Okay. Well, I will see you on Thursday. Thank you,
Okay.
everybody, for joining us with our
You.
first class, and we'll be back and we'll start the Dark Knight. I believe is our next class, is it not?
No, no, no. The Canticle
The
is the
Canticle.
next class. Yeah. Next week is the Dark Knight. We'll have
Right.
two classes
Next
of the
week is the
Dark
Dark Knight. The
Knight.
Canticle is the next one. It's
Yeah. It
wonderful.
comes first. That was his first poem. Yeah.
Got it. Got it. Thank
Okay.
you, everybody. Good night.